My name is April Mason. I am president and founder of Violet PR. Thank you all so much for attending our webinar today. We thought that the timing was particularly good to talk about how to get media coverage and how to leverage that coverage to help attract foreign direct investments. Given that we just wrapped up several days at Select USA, where there were at least 70 international and national journalists. So we have an exciting program for you all today. We're going to talk for about 20 minutes and then leave the rest of the time for Q&A. So we should be able to keep this at exactly half an hour, depending on how long the questions go. But thank you again for joining. And I know on the next slide, we just have our photos. So as I mentioned, I founded Violet PR about 12 years ago and have a deep background, almost 30 years working in economic development marketing.
And I'm Nicole Marshall. I am a senior account director here at Violet PR, and I have 17, 18 years of experience working in economic development, media relations. I'm excited to join April here today and help share some of these tips and ideas. So for our goals, we're going to try to cover a lot. It's kind of fun to try to put what you do all day, every day into a 20-minute session. So forgive us if we get too excited about this subject. But some of the goals today, we're just going to try to give you a broad brush of the landscape of the media that is relevant to specifically FDI stories. Obviously, economic development PR encompasses more than just FDI, but specifically in the area of FDI. And we'll give you some tips and ideas for how to connect with the media and how to make your FDI story stand out, with the ambition of telling your story on a broader stage. So not just the local news that you often likely get through your FDI news, but at a national and international level. And then at the end, we'll kind of wrap with just a few tips of what to do with that press coverage once you land it. You know, when you get those great headlines that are just the perfect headline, what are the ways that you can kind of get more mileage out of that and use it to more broadly impact your goals at your EDO?
So the next few slides, we're going to talk about the relevant media landscape. And this is really focused on how to reach those international business executives and investors. So the first group of press that we like to work with are press that you will recognize. So Bloomberg, CNN, Associated Press, Wall Street Journal. They have bureaus all across the US, and many of them, their big headquarters are in New York. But they also have bureaus all over the world. So if you get a Bloomberg or a Reuters story, you're often setting yourself up to reach thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps, international business executives. And then on the next slide, this slide, we've listed a few media that we work with on a fairly regular basis. These would be the major daily news outlets in target countries. Le Monde is French, Handelsblatt and Die Welt are German. Nikkei is kind of the big juggernaut in Japan. Financial Times is England, which has a pretty big presence in the US as well. And then Beijing Global is a Chinese news outlet that reaches a sizable business audience. So our media list for international includes hundreds of outlets and reporters, and we slice it and dice it based on the country and the focus of the publication.
So I'm going to talk about a few things that are key, what we consider key elements of a newsworthy FDI story. And April's going to give us some killer examples that kind of showcase how those elements actually get utilized to land good top tier national, international stories. And the first one is just the kind of obvious one, that there needs to be an international hook. I kind of joke sometimes there are some companies these days that are so global in nature that we almost forget where they're from. And because they have such a strong presence in markets all over the globe, we can lose track that whether or not they actually apply as a piece of international business news. But also, it's making sure that you're telling the story to the right audience, the right country, and you're painting more of a country to country story. and what are the ties? Why does it matter to that person located in that international market? The next item we'll have some good examples for. This would probably be arguably true for every PR pitch that you put into the world. There has to be an element of timeliness. We call it the why now. With FDI announcements, certainly there is an obvious moment, but there are sometimes kind of other moments that you can reutilize for that moment. So when the deal gets signed, there's your first timely moment, but there's other moments along the way that might help tell that FDI story as well. But I want to give it over to April here for a couple examples of how, as economic development organizations, we can stay folded into the timely announcement, to the biggest announcement when it first gets unveiled.
Yeah, so this was a fun one. We learned on a Monday afternoon that Toyota was going to announce an $8 billion expansion in North Carolina the following day. And as the PR team for the Economic Development Partnership for North Carolina, it was our job to figure out how to tell that story, how to get our client quoted in news stories that would inevitably cover this huge expansion. $8 billion is nothing to sneeze at. And I think now it's brought the total investment to closer to 14 billion in North Carolina. So the challenge was, we knew that Toyota was going to put out their own news release, and we've included an example of it here. So Toyota had their own news release. We really had no control over that. The release did include some basic specs about the project and a quote from the governor, which was great. But what it didn't have was as much of what we wanted, which was the Why North Carolina story. And so in our news release, we were able to include many, many talking points about North Carolina's desirability for international investment and for electric vehicle battery manufacturing, etc. And that led to multiple big news stories. So our release went out about 10 minutes after Toyota's release went out. We couldn't scoop the company. So we knew what time theirs was going to go out. We sent ours 10 minutes later on the wire, but we also emailed it to specific news outlets where we really wanted to see coverage. And these are 3 that responded to our pitch and asked for interviews with Christopher Chung, who was the head of the Economic Development Partnership in North Carolina. So we were able to get Christopher quoted in all 3 of these huge news stories, TechCrunch, AP, and FT, and got a lot of our messaging in as a result. And I think if we had not sent our own pitch timed exactly with Toyota's announcement, we'd waited another day, these news outlets would have just picked up the news story and run with what they had from Toyota. And instead, we were able to shape these 3 very influential stories.
And a little shout out, one of our North Carolina clients is on the line. So thanks for joining today. And we love working with Team North Carolina there. Another example of a key element that we consider necessary for a proactive pitch on FDI is what we call first, biggest, best. That's kind of an old PR term, but essentially the idea is that if you want the story to go beyond just being a piece of local news, it has to be distinguishable from all the many other FDI stories that are happening around the globe on a daily or monthly basis. So you need to do, and that's the part that requires the upfront research sometimes, whether it's your PR staff or your business development staff. How do we figure out what makes this particular deal unique? Was this the first time that a country is investing in your market, or a company from a certain country is investing in your market? Or is it a really innovative new technology that's never before been something that you've had in your market? Or is it the number of jobs? Are there some scale things that you could use, or some first of its kind pieces that you could use as well? I think we have a couple good examples here to kind of showcase, or at least one good example of how taking that first and biggest element can be utilized to get top tier headlines that maybe you wouldn't have gotten for your announcement before.
Yeah, so this was a super exciting announcement that we worked on just last month at Select USA. So our client, the Oklahoma Department of Commerce, had worked closely with a Norwegian solar company called Norsun, who had selected Oklahoma after a global search for the $620 million facility factory. And what was fun in this case was that the company did not have their own PR representation in North America. So we were able to do a joint press release with the company and put out one news item instead of two, and also encourage the company to make a big splash at Select USA. So they held on to the news for a few extra weeks in order to make it on the trade show floor. And what made it the biggest in this case is that at Select USA, there were probably 10 or 12 international investments announced on the floor of the show, but we learned from Select USA that this was by far the biggest. So that was fantastic. It made a huge splash, and I don't have the photo, but there's another photo of at least 100 people on the trade show floor kind of standing behind these gentlemen. And we also had the governor of Oklahoma with the CEO of the company shaking hands, which was pretty exciting. On the trade show floor, also, we were able to arrange interviews. So Amanda Chu from the Financial Times was able to attend the press event and then speak with the corporate executive as well as the governor of Oklahoma, our client, at the same time. And then she ran the story right away. So this was huge in terms of timeliness, in terms of size. It was also the first Norwegian announcement in the state of Oklahoma. So there were a lot of really cool ways to spin the story and generate excitement. These were two of the bigger hits that we received.
Yes, and we have a slide full of logos of all the other hits that went with that too. The next element that we just wanted to touch on is really, this is specific to you all as economic development folks, is the idea that our job as a part of our efforts in these stories is to provide deeper insight, because the company obviously gets to tell their story. The company is the one who gets to talk about dollars invested, jobs created, the company owns a lot of the story, but you get the chance to try to add value, add perspective, and tell the story on a broader way about why that market is the one that this company chose, and why others should also be selecting your market as well. So we have some interesting examples of ways to get that deeper insight conveyed, because a lot of times we know reporters these days, especially, they don't have much time to work on their stories. They don't have a lot of opportunity to do their research and to tell a really deeper dive story. So there's a few tactics that you can take to help make sure that they have that insight either before the announcement happens or immediately right after, so that they can provide a little more of the why.
Yeah, so one incredible tactic that we've been able to utilize over the years is our relationship with the Foreign Press Center. The Foreign Press Center is actually part of the State Department, and it was formed long ago, I think in the World War II era, to get out favorable news about the United States globally. Now it really serves as a network for international media that are based in the US looking for news stories. There's a large office space where they do press events in New York at the United Nations building. And there's a separate office that they have in Washington, D.C. And then they also have thousands and thousands of journalists that they email to on a daily basis with news about what's happening across the United States. So we've been able to build a really nice relationship with the Foreign Press Center staff, and they will host groups of spokespeople provided that you have a good story, and it's not just a sales kind of presentation. They are usually delighted to have city and state officials come and speak to their group. So in this case, we had executives from the Savannah Economic Development Council, as well as the Georgia Port Authority, speaking about the Savannah port. It's the fourth largest port in the US and the fastest growing. And at the time, there was a lot of growth coming in from Asia, kind of traveling through the Panama Canal and landing at the Savannah port. So that was the presentation that was given. And I think after the hour-long briefing, we were able to generate multiple news stories, including a Financial Times piece and this international shipping publication, which was exciting. And then also we were able to stay in contact with all of the journalists that attended. For Kansas City, this was actually during COVID, but it is continued. We were able to set up a virtual briefing. So no longer do you have to travel to New York and DC. You can also do a virtual briefing from your offices. And this is Tim Cowden, the CEO of the Kansas City Area Development Council, talking about why Kansas City is a great spot for international investment. And we were able to generate a French news story and also coverage on the Foreign Press Center website, which is also really great because thousands of journalists follow that.
And then we just wanted to kind of take a minute to touch through some more creative tactics and clever ways to help stand out again against the dozens and dozens of big international FDI stories that are happening every month. Each national, international media outlet can only talk about your market so often, and they can only talk about so many markets at a time. So standing out is still a challenge, even if you have $460 million or you have, I won't say $8 billion. I think you always stand out somewhat for that one, but I think that there's a lot of really valuable deals to your EDOs that are definitely newsworthy on a national, international stage to help continue the flow of your FDI decisions. So some of these tactics, April mentioned this one before about the Norsun deal in Oklahoma. That was an example of an international company that did not already have a PR agent in the US. So they didn't have the infrastructure set up to really tell that announcement to American audiences. So the relationship that was formed there through the Economic Development Office or the Department of Commerce provided a service to them. Hey, we'll help you get your announcement out. And then the other flip side is we're going to also make sure Oklahoma stays in the story, and we're going to make sure that the story is told with our key messages embedded in it. So we see this with several clients around the country and in other markets, but the Economic Development Office can sometimes kind of become like the PR agent for the announcement, depending on where the business is in their life cycle. So being willing to offer that, we've seen it actually develop really strong ties with these companies that then become long-term relationships where they stay in touch. And you can also help secure expansion deals as a result of that really strong relationship. So that's one tactic. Another tactic that we often have to remind our clients sometimes that it's worth it to get ahead of the news. And even though we might sometimes not end up getting to tell the news because maybe the deal falls through. So I think we've seen some great successes with clients where even if we're able to get part of the information ahead of time, or your PR team on staff is able to get part of the information, maybe they don't have a company name, but they know what industry they're in, they know what country they're from, they know some unique things about what they'll be producing or manufacturing at the facility or what skill sets will be needed for the hiring. And that allows your PR team to do research and try to find the unique angle, or what trend is this actually feeding into, or what reporters have talked about that country recently. So you find that when the announcement is actually made, there's a lot more of an opportunity to do really targeted pitching and secure better quality stories. But that said, we often, we recognize that some of those deals will not actually land, and then we'll all just have to, take a breather and realize we lost some time, but it was worth it in the long run to have that access to the information. Another tactic that we like to promote and encourage is that when you are abroad, you should also be considering meeting with the media in those markets, in those targeted countries, or major urban media markets in those countries while you're there. So we know that business development folks can rue the day sometimes, that they're the boss when it comes to those itineraries. But essentially, if you're able to allow some PR outreach and have some in-person media visits while you're there in market, you might find that there's an appetite for that, depending on who your spokespeople are. And we'll show you some examples of that here in a second. And then another one is just this was a creative tactic we'll tell you about from another client, but what ways could you help a reporter feel like they understand the FDI process a little bit more? Can you tell them more specifics about the steps that transpired that helped secure that $8 billion investment? Or could you even let them in the room for a meeting? So we'll kind of go through some examples there, because reporters love getting a sense of more the nitty gritty of the deal making too. And we find that they're always asking for more of that kind of insight. So these examples are some of the ones where they were secured by meeting with the press while the economic development officials were in those other markets. The one on the left I'll talk about for a second. This was in Switzerland for our North Carolina client as well. When the governor was going to be there for some really targeted business meetings, we were able to tack on even just one media visit was enough to land a full page print piece and online piece in a top business publication in Switzerland called nicknamed BZ for those of us who don't speak all the right languages. But this was a great result of the economic development group working with the governor's staff and being willing to collaborate on his schedule and try to find time to also include media in his trade mission visit.
Yeah, and this next story was this fantastic Associated Press story that we worked with our clients in the state of Idaho to generate. Our client, Jan Rogers, is a very experienced economic developer, had attracted several small investments from Japanese food processing companies. And she was in Japan with her team to work to build those relationships and further them. And actually, she was able to get one of the Japanese executives to attend a briefing with the Associated Press with her. And so that led to this huge story, which ended up getting picked up by dozens and dozens of news outlets all over the world. But it came from a Tokyo-based reporter. And this was another really fun one that we did on behalf of Jan Rogers, also in Idaho. They were open enough to allow a McClatchy news reporter to sit in on a sales pitch at Select USA with the governor of Idaho and a company that was somehow involved in turning chicken manure into some sort of product. And the company was considering a location in Idaho. Of course, it was a creative hook. The reporter came up with a great headline, and that story also got picked up by dozens and dozens of news outlets because it was a wire service all over the country, and with the governor's photo, which was super exciting.
And this one was, I think, April, you're going to take and talk about a little bit of the relationship side of media relations. So how do we build these relationships in a way that they think to call us as an additional resource as the economic development group when they hear about a deal happening in your market? So there's some interesting ideas for how we go about that.
Yeah, so I think, one great way to build a relationship with a reporter and have them really get to know your region is to host them on the ground. And we have learned that a lot of international reporters welcome being hosted. They don't know the US like Americans do. They don't know who to call to get interviews. Often there's a bit of a language barrier as well. So that's certainly a tactic we've used successfully for many, many clients. I think also anytime you can offer an exclusive, some opportunity for, say, a German reporter to meet one-on-one with the German CEO or a German North American executive in a particular market is huge and can go a very long way to build those relationships. And finding out what their personal interests are, always good. And I think we've got a couple of examples here, and we're almost finished with our presentation. I know we're a little bit over our projected time, but Lehigh Valley has hosted a number of international journalists. This publication, which we've started calling WeWo in the office because I cannot pronounce the first word, but it's essentially the German Business Week. And the reporter spent 2 days on the ground in the Lehigh Valley meeting with high-tech manufacturing companies. And we also were able to identify a number of German companies that were in the Lehigh Valley. So they were included in the news story, and the client was absolutely thrilled. But the client did stay with this reporter, and I do want to caution you guys, international reporters are the equivalent of top tier media here in the US. They're not like trade publications that will often just kind of write puff pieces. They will look for, the negative as well as the positive to really tell a dramatic story. And so we always advise preparing an itinerary in advance, staying with the reporter on every visit, and just make sure their visit is curated. So this is another trip we organized for a major French publication to Oklahoma. Again, it was a 2-day itinerary. and more focused on Oklahoma's reputation for understanding the weather. Apparently, the meteorology school in the University of Oklahoma is like the top one in the country because of tornadoes. So that was kind of an interesting hook that they grabbed onto.
Awesome. And we'll just take a quick second to glance past these items. We have a few recommendations for kind of what to do with that press after you get it, because it's not useful enough to just have the eyeballs that see it that first day when it runs. You want to really bring some more life to those placements when they happen. So um, the first tactic is actually more focused on taking your local news and getting that out to national and international press, because sometimes your local reporters do a great job of telling a compelling story that make that national or international reporter want to actually come back and look more into that particular deal. So that's one step you can take from your local pieces. Additionally, obviously, just turning it into a multi-channel marketing approach. So social posts, email marketing, websites, there's a lot of things you can do to make sure that those pieces get a lot more eyeballs and strategic eyeballs. So using it in your business development process and making sure your business developers know, for those who specialize in a certain country or a certain industry, getting those pieces into their hands so that they know they have a tool that they can use in their follow-up and their outreach to those company targets in the pipeline. So here's some examples of some of our clients just doing a great job of posting that content on their websites and social media, and then reusing video pieces when those happen, making sure to get a lot of life. And the more digital you go with the stuff afterwards, the more data you get to understand what people are interested in. So with that, we'll take we have about 2 minutes or 3 minutes. We can stick for a minute if anybody has questions that we didn't answer. And feel free to post them through the Q&A here on the platform on Zoom. And I think we'll be able to see those no problem. And if there aren't questions, I think several of you are folks that we've met and we've connected with over time too. So we can definitely stay in touch afterwards if you want to have a follow-up chat one-on-one. We're happy to do that. And we will share the recording of this session so that those of you who attended, or if any of your colleagues weren't able to join, that they can also give it a watch in their free time. It looks like I have one question that came in about how large does an FDI investment deal need to be for it to be considered newsworthy enough to hit the national and international press? Kind of a good one of sense of scale. Is there a magic scale button? April, you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously bigger is better. So, 8 billion in North Carolina certainly helped. But some of the Japanese investment that we were able to get tons of coverage for, it was really like 10 or 15 jobs. But what we were able to do there, I think if you don't have size, I think a unique visual story will go a long way. So in this case, I think it was the surprise of Japanese, living in Tokyo, deciding to check out a very rural location for an expansion, and learning about the tie-ins between Japan and Idaho in terms of the food market was really interesting. So I think there are multiple ways to skin this, but size or uniqueness, I would say, or both will help.
Yeah, agreed for sure. And there's another question that came in that says, how do I know which media outlets are worth working with when dealing with international outlets where the languages are hard to navigate or publications I've never heard of before?
Yeah, I mean, we've dealt with that recently when we were working on arranging interviews for the governor's visit to Europe. I know there was one publication we looked at in Switzerland that turned out to be more of a tabloid. And it's hard because they're in another language. It's sometimes hard to gauge, is this a legit source or is this, more of a tabloid? And I think, looking at reputation, I often will look at their Wikipedia page, have it translated. If you can sense that the outlet has a large circulation, if it reaches a business audience, if you can translate some of the news stories about America and see if you can get a sense of how they write about America, I think that those will all go a long way to help you determine whether this is a good opportunity or something you should stay stay away from.
And certainly one little plug for the value of having a PR agency is that we're working with these publications oftentimes repeatedly. Certainly not all of them, but there are several that we have a history with. And I think that those repeat relationships help us know whether or not there's that we can be confident that the quality of the coverage in a particular international outlet would be something that you would want your organization associated with. So the agency model can help with that, but there are new outlets springing up all the time and new reporters that we also haven't worked with. So it's always a important step to have some due diligence as you get introduced to a new publication. And I think that's it. That's all the questions we received. And if anybody has any afterwards, we'll of course share our contact information along with the recorded presentation so that we can just get into a conversation directly if it's helpful.
Thank you, everyone, for taking time with us today. And as Nicole said, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks so much.
Bye.